The Forbidden Zone captain, Sarah Chen, stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Terra's Pride, watching the endless tapestry of stars stretch across the main display. 3 years had passed since they left Earth's orbit, and every day brought them deeper into uncharted space. The ship hummed with quiet efficiency around her, a testament to human engineering and the dreams of a species that refused to be contained by the boundaries of a single world. Sarah had commanded deep space missions for over 15 years, but this expedition was different. They were not just exploring new systems or cataloging planets. They were humanity's first ambassadors to whatever civilizations might exist in the vast darkness between stars. The responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders, but it also filled her with a fierce pride that seemed to burn in her chest. Dr. Marcus Webb sat hunched over his workstation in the ship's communication center, surrounded by screens filled with alien symbols and waveform patterns. As the ship's xenolinguist, Marcus had spent years preparing for this moment. He had studied every theoretical framework for alien communication, learned dozens of mathematical and linguistic principles that might bridge the gap between species, and dreamed of the day when humanity would finally hear voices from the stars. That day had come sooner than anyone expected. The signal had appeared on their sensors 3 hours ago, broadcasting across multiple frequencies with the kind of power that suggested it was meant to reach every corner of the galaxy. Marcus had been working feverishly to decode it ever since, and what he was discovering made his hands tremble as he typed. Engineer Rosa Martinez moved through the ship's corridors like a dancer, checking systems and making adjustments with the kind of intuitive understanding that came from years of working with machinery. Rosa had been born on Mars, raised in the asteroid belt, and trained on Europa. She understood technology the way other people understood art or music, seeing patterns and connections that escaped most engineers. The ship was her instrument, and she played it with masterful skill. But even Rosa could feel the tension. Building aboard the Terra's Pride, something was happening that none of them had anticipated. When they left Earth, the signal that Marcus was decoding was not a greeting or an invitation. It was something else entirely. Marcus finally looked up from his screens, his face pale with shock and excitement. He activated the ship's internal communication system and spoke in a voice that barely concealed his amazement. "Captain Chen, you need to see this immediately. All senior staff to the communication center." Sarah arrived within minutes, followed by Rosa and the rest of the bridge crew. Marcus had transferred his analysis to the main display, where alien symbols slowly transformed into readable text. The translation was still rough, but the meaning was becoming terrifyingly clear. The message was a warning, broadcast to every known civilization in the galaxy. It described a species from the outer rim that posed an unprecedented threat to galactic stability. The aliens who sent the message had apparently been studying this species for decades, watching from a distance as they developed technology and spread across their home system. What they had observed filled them with fear. The warning described creatures that refuse to accept natural limits. When faced with hostile environments, instead of adapting themselves, they changed their surroundings. When confronted with superior enemies, they found ways to turn disadvantages into advantages. When their logic dictated surrender, they chose to fight until victory or death. They were unpredictable, aggressive, and possessed a kind of stubborn determination that defied all rational analysis. The most chilling part of the message was its conclusion. These creatures were preparing to leave their home system. They had developed faster than light travel and were beginning to explore the galaxy. Every civilization that received the warning was advised to avoid contact at all costs. If contact became unavoidable, the recommended response was immediate surrender, followed by a plea for mercy. The species they were describing was humanity. Rosa was the first to break the stunned silence that followed Marcus's presentation. She laughed, a sound that was equal parts amazement and disbelief. "They make us sound like monsters," she said, "like some kind of unstoppable plague that consumes everything in its path." Marcus scrolled through more of the translated text. "The level of detail is incredible," he said. "They know about our history, our wars, our exploration of the solar system. They have been watching us for decades, maybe longer. They know things about us that we barely know about ourselves." Sarah studied the data with the careful attention she had learned to apply to all tactical situations. The aliens had made detailed observations of human behavior during crisis situations. They had analyzed human responses to natural disasters, military conflicts, and technological challenges. What they had discovered was a pattern of behavior that apparently existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Most species, according to the message, followed predictable patterns when faced with overwhelming challenges. They would assess the situation, calculate their chances of success, and choose the most logical response. If defeat seemed certain, they would surrender. If the odds were against them, they would retreat. If a problem appeared unsolvable, they would accept it as a limitation. Humans did not follow these patterns. Instead of surrendering when defeat seemed certain, humans would continue fighting and often find ways to win against impossible odds. Instead of retreating when outnumbered, they would use creativity and determination to overcome superior forces. Instead of accepting limitations, they would find ways to transcend them through ingenuity and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. The aliens had concluded that humanity was not just dangerous, but fundamentally unpredictable. They could not be reasoned with according to normal galactic standards because their logic was based on principles that no other species shared. They were described as creatures who turned their weaknesses into strengths and their disadvantages into opportunities for victory. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing them through alien eyes for the first time. Rosa, who had grown up in the harsh environment of the asteroid belt and learned to make miraculous repairs with whatever materials were available. Marcus, who had spent years learning to communicate with theoretical aliens and was now successfully decoding their most complex transmissions. Her navigation officer, who could plot courses through stellar hazards that would terrify most pilots. Her security chief, who had trained for combat scenarios that most species would consider suicide missions. They were exactly what the aliens had described: stubborn, unpredictable, and absolutely unwilling to be turned away from their goals by the threat of danger. The ship's communication system suddenly came alive with multiple incoming transmissions. Marcus worked frantically to sort through them as signals arrived from different directions and in different alien languages. The translations began appearing on screen one by one, and each message carried the same basic warning: turn back immediately. Return to your home system. You are not welcome in civilized space. Some of the messages were polite requests, explaining that contact between humans and other species would be dangerous for all involved. Others were barely concealed threats, promising destruction if the human ship continued its course. A few seemed to be desperate pleas, begging the humans to reconsider their mission for the sake of galactic peace. Sarah read through each message carefully, then looked at her crew. They had traveled 3 years to reach this point. They had left Earth with the hopes and dreams of their entire species resting on their shoulders. They had overcome countless technical challenges and navigated through dangers that would have stopped previous generations of explorers. Now they faced a choice that would determine not just their own fate, but the future relationship between humanity and every other intelligent species in the galaxy. Rosa was checking the ship's systems and calculating their options. "Captain," she said, "we could return to Earth. We have enough supplies and fuel to make the journey. We could report what we have learned and let the politicians decide how to respond." Marcus was still working on the alien transmissions. "Or we could try to make contact," he said. "These messages prove that there are multiple civilizations out there. If we approach them carefully, we might be able to establish peaceful communication." Sarah considered both options, but she already knew what her decision would be. She had not come this far to turn back at the first sign of difficulty. She had not brought humanity's dreams to the edge of the galaxy, only to abandon them when the real adventure was about to begin. Asterisk. The bridge crew watched as their captain made the choice that would echo through history. "Set course for the Nexus system," Sarah ordered. "According to these transmissions, that is where the major galactic powers are gathering to discuss the human situation. If they want to meet us, then that is exactly what we are going to give them." Rosa began calculating the jump coordinates, while Marcus continued monitoring alien communications. The ship's engines powered up with a deep thrumming sound that seemed to resonate through the hull like a heartbeat. The Terror's pride turned toward its destination, carrying with it the hopes and determination of a species that had never learned to back down from a challenge. Behind them, Earth continued its quiet orbit around an ordinary star. Ahead of them waited the unknown, filled with dangers and possibilities that no human had ever imagined. But Sarah Chen and her crew were exactly the kind of people who thrived in such situations. They were human, with all the stubborn determination and creative problem-solving that the galaxy had learned to fear. They were about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing about humanity was also its greatest strength. Asterisk. The test of Fire. The Nexus system appeared on the main display like a jewel scattered across black velvet. 3 massive space stations orbited a dying star, each one representing a different alien civilization that had come to address what they called the human problem. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Terror's Pride, watching as her ship approached what might be either humanity's greatest triumph or its final destination. The largest station belonged to the crystalline hegemony, a species that had evolved from silicon-based life forms on a world with extreme temperature variations. Their structure gleamed like a cathedral made of living glass, its geometric perfection reflecting the logical mindset of its inhabitants. Commander Vexdal had been chosen to represent their position, and the communications that Marcus Webb had intercepted made their stance clear. Humans were chaotic elements that threatened the orderly development of galactic civilization. The second station was darker and more angular, bristling with weapons and defensive systems. This was the gathering point for the savage clans, warrior species that had built their culture around strength and combat prowess. War Chief Gorthak led their delegation, and his messages had been direct and brutal. If humans were as dangerous as the reports suggested, then they should be tested in battle. Only those who proved their strength deserved to exist among the stars. The third station seemed to phase in and out of visibility, as if it existed partially in normal space and partially somewhere else entirely. This belonged to the ethereal, collective energy beings so ancient that they remembered when the galaxy was young. Elder Whisper spoke for their kind. And their position was the most troubling of all. They feared that humanity represented something new and unpredictable, a force that could disrupt the careful balance that had maintained peace between species for millions of years. Rosa Martinez worked at her engineering station, monitoring the ship's systems as they approached the neutral zone between the three stations. The Terra's Pride was outnumbered, outgunned, and completely alone in hostile space. Any rational analysis would suggest that they should surrender immediately, or attempt to flee. But Rosa had grown up in the asteroid belt, where survival depended on finding creative solutions to impossible problems. She was already calculating ways to use the ship's systems in unexpected configurations. Dr. Marcus Webb sat surrounded by translation, matrices, and communication protocols, trying to establish proper diplomatic channels with three completely different alien species. The linguistic challenges were staggering, but Marcus thrived on complexity. Each alien language revealed different ways of thinking about reality, and understanding those differences might be the key to avoiding a war that humanity could not win. The ship's communication system activated, and Commander Vextel's crystalline voice filled the bridge. "Human vessel, you will dock with Nexus Station Alpha and submit to judgment. Your species stands accused of disrupting galactic stability through unpredictable and aggressive behavior. Evidence will be presented, and a verdict will be reached." War Chief Gorthek's transmission followed immediately, his voice rough as grinding stone. "If you are truly as dangerous as the warnings claim, then prove it in combat. Face me in single battle, human leader, and show whether your species deserves respect or extermination." Elder Whisper's communication came last, seeming to bypass the ship's systems entirely and speak directly to their minds. "Children of chaos, you bring change where stability has reigned for eons. Your very existence threatens the patterns that maintain order. We must determine whether you are evolution or extinction." Sarah looked at her crew, seeing the tension and determination in their faces. They were being asked to defend not just themselves, but their entire species before judges who had already decided that humanity was a threat. The smart move would be to try negotiation, to find some way to convince the aliens that humans were not as dangerous as they believed. But Sarah had not come this far to beg for acceptance. "Dock with all three stations simultaneously," she ordered. "We will face their judgment, but we will do it on our terms." Rosa's fingers flew across her console as she calculated the complex maneuvers required to position the ship between all three alien stations. It was a navigational challenge that bordered on impossible, but Rosa had been solving impossible problems her entire life. The Terra's Pride moved through space like a dancer, using gravity wells and momentum shifts to achieve a position that should have been unattainable. Marcus established communication links with all three species simultaneously, creating a three-way translation matrix that allowed real-time conversation between beings whose minds worked in fundamentally different ways. The linguistic processing power required was beyond what the ship's computers should have been able to handle. But Marcus had learned to push systems beyond their theoretical limits. The trial began immediately. Commander Vextel presented evidence of human unpredictability, showing recordings of historical events where humans had chosen seemingly irrational courses of action, battles won through impossible odds, disasters overcome through stubborn refusal to accept defeat, problems solved through creative thinking that violated established logical patterns. To the crystalline commander, this behavior represented dangerous chaos that could not be allowed to spread. War Chief Gorthek displayed his own evidence of human aggression. focusing on military conflicts and competitive behaviors that had shaped human development. But unlike Vexdal, Gorthax seemed impressed by what he saw. These creatures fought with honor and determination. They respected strength and earned victory through courage. Perhaps they were not threats, but worthy opponents who deserved a place among the warrior species. Elder Whisper's evidence was more subtle, focusing on humanity's tendency to change their environment rather than adapt to it. Humans had transformed. Their home world, built cities in impossible locations, and developed technologies that allowed them to survive in conditions that would kill most other species. To beings who valued stability and balance, this constant change represented a fundamental threat to the natural order. Sarah listened to each accusation carefully, then stood to address the alien tribunal. She could have offered explanations or apologies. She could have tried to convince them that humanity was not as dangerous as they believed. Instead, she chose to demonstrate exactly what made humans so unpredictable. "You are right about us," she said simply. "We are stubborn, aggressive, and completely unwilling to accept limitations. We turn our weaknesses into strengths and find ways to win battles that we should lose. We change our environment instead of adapting to it, and we never surrender even when logic dictates that we should." The aliens listened in stunned silence as Sarah continued. "You want to know if we are dangerous? Yes, we are. We are dangerous to anyone who threatens us or stands in the way of our goals. But we are also dangerous to problems that other species consider unsolvable, dangerous to barriers that seem insurmountable, and dangerous to any system that claims perfection cannot be improved." Before any of the aliens could respond, the ship's sensors detected a massive energy surge from the dying star at the center of the system. Rosa's engineering displays lit up with warnings as stellar radiation spiked beyond safe levels. The star was beginning to collapse, and the resulting explosion would destroy all 3 stations and everyone aboard them. Marcus calculated the time until catastrophic failure. 18 minutes, he announced. "The star's core is destabilizing faster than predicted. All 3 stations are in the destruction zone." Commander Vextal's logical mind immediately began calculating evacuation possibilities. The crystalline station could protect perhaps 30% of its population. War Chief Gorthak prepared his warriors for honorable death, accepting that some battles could not be won through strength alone. Elder Whisper's collective consciousness began the process of transferring their essence to backup storage systems light years away. Sarah looked at the tactical display, seeing a problem that 3 advanced civilizations had already accepted as unsolvable. The stations were too large to move, the evacuation ships too few, and the time remaining too short. Any rational analysis would conclude that massive casualties were inevitable. But humans were not known for accepting rational limitations. "Rosa, can you overload our main reactor to create an electromagnetic pulse?" Sarah asked. "Something powerful, enough to destabilize the star's collapse." Rosa ran the calculations. "It would destroy our ship and kill us all, but yes, the pulse might buy them an additional 6 minutes." Marcus was already working on communication protocols to coordinate evacuation efforts. "If I can link all 3 stations' computer systems through our translation matrix, they could share resources and optimize their evacuation procedures." Sarah smiled the kind of smile that had terrified alien observers for years. "Better than that. Rosa, instead of destabilizing the star, can you use our reactor overload to create a controlled fusion reaction?" something that would actually stabilize the collapse. Rosa's eyes widened as she understood what Sarah was proposing. It was completely impossible, according to every law of physics she knew. It would require perfect timing, precise calculations, and the kind of creative problem-solving that most species would consider insane. It was exactly the kind of challenge that humans lived for. Yes, she said, but we would need the power cores from all 3 stations to provide enough energy, and someone would have to manually trigger the sequence from inside the star's corona. Sarah activated communication links with all 3 alien commanders. We have a solution, but it requires trust. We need you to transfer power from your stations to our ship, and we need you to do it without asking questions or demanding explanations. Commander Vextal's crystalline voice carried notes of disbelief. You are proposing to enter a collapsing star to save beings who came here to judge whether your species should be allowed to exist. Warchief Gorthak's laugh rumbled through the communication system. Madness and courage are often the same thing. I will transfer power to your ship, human captain. Elder Whisper's response seemed to come from everywhere at once. You would sacrifice yourselves for strangers who fear you. This is the chaos we warned against, but perhaps chaos is what the universe needs. Power began flowing from all 3 stations to the Terra's Pride. Rosa worked with inhuman speed to reconfigure the ship's systems, turning their exploration vessel into a weapon designed to fight a star. Marcus coordinated with alien technicians whose minds worked in ways he barely understood, finding common ground in mathematics and desperation. Sarah took the ship into the dying star's corona, riding waves of plasma and radiation that should have vaporized them instantly. The temperature outside reached millions of degrees. The gravity well threatened to crush their hull. The magnetic fields played havoc with every system on the ship. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans specialized in. At the critical moment, with the star's collapse reaching the point of no return, Rosa triggered the modified reactor overload. The Terra's Pride became a controlled supernova for exactly 3.7 seconds. Generating a fusion pulse that stabilized the stellar collapse and converted the dying star into a stable neutron star. The ship survived by exactly 17 seconds before its hull breached and its systems failed. But it survived, and so did everyone in the Nexus system. In the aftermath, as rescue ships from all 3 species worked to save the Terra's Pride and her crew, the aliens found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about humanity. These creatures had indeed been unpredictable and aggressive, but they had used those traits to save lives rather than destroy them. Commander Vextal was the first to speak during the recovery operations. We feared your chaos, but perhaps order without change leads only to stagnation and death. Warchief Gorthek's warriors sang songs of honor for beings who had faced death to save their enemies. You fight not for conquest, but for life itself. This is the highest form of courage. Elder Whisper's consciousness touched each human mind. Gently. We sensed disruption in your presence, but disruption can also mean growth, change, and the birth of new possibilities. Sarah Chen, recovering in the medical bay of a crystalline hospital ship, smiled as she listened to their words. The galaxy had warned itself about humanity, describing them as dangerous and unpredictable creatures who refused to accept limitations. They had been absolutely right, but they had not understood that the same traits that made humans dangerous in war also made them invaluable in peace. Humanity had not asked permission to explore the galaxy. They had come anyway, bringing with them all the stubborn determination and creative problem-solving that had allowed them to survive on a hostile planet and spread across an entire solar system. The galaxy had tried to turn them away, but humans did not accept defeat easily. Instead, they had turned their greatest weaknesses into their greatest strengths, proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing about humanity was also what made them irreplaceable. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps that was exactly what it needed. The stars waited ahead, full of new challenges and impossible problems, and humanity, as always, was ready to prove that impossible was just another word for something they had not figured out how to do yet. Asterisk.